My son took the $85,000 I saved for my first real home and bought his wife a luxury SUV. Instead, he said she deserved something nice. But when my 17-year-old grandson stood up with his phone and asked, "Grandma, should I tell them who you really are?" their smiles died right there in my living room. She was still smiling when the officer reached her hand out and said, "Ma'am, the keys." It wasn't the smile that broke me. It was the confidence behind it, the absolute certainty, right up until that second, that she had won. Brittany had been smiling like that for 6 months, through the manipulation, through the lies, through the moment my own son stood in my living room and told me, with that particular mixture of pride and contempt that only a child can produce, that they had taken every cent I'd saved in 40 years and bought her a luxury SUV. She was still smiling when my grandson Noah rose from the couch beside me, raised his phone and asked, "Dad, should I tell them who Grandma really is?" Her smile stopped, just stopped, like a power cut. That moment is where this story ends. But to understand why it mattered, you need to know where it started. You need to know about 40 years of scrubbing other people's floors. You need to know about the brown dress. You need to know about my Uncle Arthur and the secret I kept so long it almost felt like a lie. And you need to understand what it means to spend a lifetime being underestimated and to have finally chosen to stop pretending. My name is Eleanor May Hutchins. I am 67 years old and I have never owned a home, not for lack of trying. God knows, not for lack of trying. I came to this city at 22 with a suitcase and $60 and the specific determination of someone who had never been given anything and had decided early that this was actually an advantage. No safety net meant no false assumptions about how the fall would go. I cleaned offices at night and took in alterations during the day. Prom dresses, wedding gowns, bridesmaid sets in unflattering colors the bridesmaids privately hated. Working by lamplight after my day jobs because the electric bill only allowed me one room lit at a time. I catered weekend events in freezing February rain, carrying trays of shrimp cocktail and water glasses through parking lots while the guests stayed warm inside. I wore slip-resistant shoes that cost $40 and lasted 2 years if I was careful, and I was always careful. I raised David alone after his father left when the boy was 3. I did it in a series of rented rooms and small apartments. Always a landlord's name on the lease, never mine. Always subject to someone else's rules, someone else's inspection, someone else's decision to raise the rent by $300 in a month and smile and say, "Well, you know the market." I knew the market. I also knew what it felt like to pack your child's toys into boxes at 11 p.m. because the new lease started the next morning and you hadn't finished. So I saved. $1 here, 40 there. I opened a savings account that I treated like a locked safe. Deposits in, nothing out. Not for vacations, not for new furniture, not for anything that wasn't survival. Every year the number grew a little. By the time David was in high school, I had $14,000. By the time he graduated college, I'd paid for half of it. I had $31,000. The work never slowed, neither did the saving. I had one dream, not a mansion, not a vacation property, just a small house with my name on the deed, a place no one could reclaim, a place where I could hang a picture on the wall without asking permission, where I could plant something in a garden and know I'd be there to see it grow. By last autumn, I had $85,000. I was close. So close I'd already talked to a real estate agent, a young woman named Patricia Osei, with bright orange reading glasses and a gift for finding hidden value in overlooked neighborhoods. We'd been to 3 properties. One of them, a blue 2-bedroom on Clement Street with a bay window and a yard full of overgrown lavender, made my chest ache in the best possible way. "It needs work," Patricia said. "I know how to work," I told her. She laughed. We shook hands. We were going to make an offer. Then David came over. He wore what I privately call his responsible son face, brow slightly furrowed, voice lowered just enough to signal concern. He's always been handsome, my David. Got his father's jaw. Got my stubbornness, though he'd deny it. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table like a man about to have a difficult conversation with an employee. "I worry about you keeping that much cash around. It's in a savings account, David. It's not under the mattress. But you're getting older." He said it gently, which made it worse. "You might forget things. Passwords get complicated. Banks fail. I just think it would be better if I managed it. I can set up a proper investment account, protect it, grow it." He brought papers. He brought what looked like official documentation from a financial management firm. He was wearing his good blazer. I asked him if I could read everything overnight. He said, of course. I read it. It looked legitimate. And when he came back the next morning, patient and warm, I told myself, this is my son. He loves me. He wants to protect what I've built. I transferred the account to his name. If I close my eyes now, I can still feel the pen in my hand. The way it felt like I was signing something important, something hopeful. The pride I felt that I had raised a son thoughtful enough to worry about his mother's future. I didn't hear from David for 3 weeks after that. The first sign of trouble came from Noah. My grandson is 17 and slight. Same quiet eyes his grandfather had. He calls me Grandma E and has since he was 4. He's the kind of teenager who reads without being told and apologizes when he's wrong and says thank you like he means it. He showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon without texting first, which wasn't like him. He had his backpack on one shoulder and his face was doing something something complicated. "Grandma E," he said. "Can I come in?" I made him tea. He sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the mug and said, quietly and without looking up, "I went to Dad's study to use the printer. His laptop was open." He paused. "I wasn't snooping. I was just going to print something. But the files were open. All of them." "What files?" He finally looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. "Grandma, they're $120,000 in debt. They got an eviction notice. They're losing the apartment in 2 weeks." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his bag. He'd photographed the screen and printed it, methodical even in panic. "I found credit card statements for cards I didn't even know Mom had. 6 of them, mostly designer stuff. And there's something else." He set the paper flat between us. "Bank statements, my account number, David's name, a transaction record showing a cash transfer and a wire payment to a car dealership." My hands stayed on the table. I kept them still. Something in my chest went very, very quiet. "The SUV is in her name only," Noah whispered. "Not Dad's, just hers." I looked at my grandson, 17 years old, trembling slightly, having just realized what his parents had done. "Noah," I said, "you did the right thing. Thank you." He nodded. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "What are you going to do?" I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. "I'm going to make a phone call," I said. "Robert Henderson has been my attorney for 15 years. He's 61, heavy-set, with reading glasses he only wears in private, and an ability to convey complex legal situations in a tone of voice like a man ordering lunch. He doesn't startle easily. He's seen too much. He is also the only person outside a sealed will who knew about my Uncle Arthur." I called him that Tuesday evening, after Noah went home. I told Robert what had happened in 2 minutes flat. There was a brief silence on his end. Then he said, "Eleanor, how would you like to proceed?" "Fully," I said. "I want everything. I'll start in the morning." What Robert built over the next 72 hours was meticulous. He retained Marcus Webb, a forensic accountant with 23 years of experience in financial fraud cases, to trace the full movement of my $85,000. Marcus found it fast. The transfer was barely disguised. The money had been moved to a joint account, then partially used to settle an overdue credit card bill, and the remainder wired directly to Meridian Motors on Route 9 as a cashier's payment for one pearl-white Mercedes GLE 450 SUV, titled solely to Brittany Ann Calloway Hutchins. Marcus also pulled 3 months of credit card activity on 6 cards in Brittany's name that David's income could not have supported. The total outstanding balance across those cards was $61,400. Designer clothing, hotel reservations in cities David had never mentioned visiting, 2 spa weekends, and a recurring payment to a number that Marcus flagged with a single notation: personal contact, non-marital indication. Robert hired one additional investigator, Diane Fortis, a licensed private investigator who had testified in 17 civil fraud cases. Diane worked fast. Within 48 hours, she had documented something that made Robert call me on a Thursday night and say slowly and carefully, "Eleanor, this woman has done this before. A man named Stephen Graves in Albuquerque. They'd been together for 2 years. She'd run up debt in his name, isolated him from his family, and when she left, she'd taken $50,000 in cash his elderly mother had given him for safekeeping." Stephen's mother, 74 years old, a retired school librarian, had spent 18 months trying to recover that money. The case was settled out of court under a confidentiality agreement that Diane said was paper thin. "The pattern is identical," Diane told me over the phone. Her voice was crisp and unbothered, the way people get when they've spent years staring at terrible things and decided to focus on what can be done about them. "She identifies a family with accessible resources, attaches to a son or a younger male figure, positions herself as central to his finances, then creates an exit vehicle. The vehicle is always titled in her name. Always. The vehicle is how she leaves." I sat with that for a moment. "The vehicle," I said. "The vehicle," she confirmed. Noah had told me something in my kitchen that now snapped into place. "She's just waiting for the right moment to leave." He'd overheard a phone call. He'd seen a name on her phone that wasn't his father's. The SUV wasn't a luxury purchase. It was a getaway car. Friday morning, Robert filed the civil fraud claim. Because the transfer of my funds had been accomplished using financial documentation that Marcus confirmed contained misrepresentations, the investment account David had brought me to sign was not registered with any financial management firm and listed a company address that corresponded to an empty commercial suite. Robert was also in contact with Detective Luis Carrera at the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Carrera, 12 years on the force with a specialty in elder financial fraud, reviewed Marcus's findings on Friday afternoon and by early evening had issued a preliminary seizure order on the vehicle. The order would be executed Monday morning. I asked Robert if I could be present. He said, "Eleanor, I wouldn't have it any other way." Over the weekend, I went to church in my brown dress. I sat in my usual pew. I sang the hymns I know by heart. Nobody looking at me would have known a thing. That was by design. It has always been by design. Now, I have to tell you about Arthur. My Uncle Arthur Hutchins was my mother's older brother, and he was the least dramatic man I've ever known. He worked in real estate development for 35 years. Not the flashy kind, not the glass towers downtown with his name on them, but the quiet, unglamorous kind. Industrial properties, leased retail space, the kind of buildings that anchor a neighborhood without anyone noticing them. He drove the same Buick for 12 years. He owned 4 pairs of shoes, work, church, casual, and a pair of brown hiking boots he wore on weekends that were older than some of his tenants' businesses. He said almost nothing about money except that he didn't trust anyone who talked about it too much. He never married, never had children. When I was young and struggling, he would sometimes appear at my door with a bag of groceries and set it on my counter without explanation, then sit down and ask how David was doing in school. He didn't make it a gift, he made it a visit. That was his way. When Arthur died at 81, quietly, in the same modest house he'd lived in for 40 years, in the bed he'd slept in since the 70s, I cried for 2 weeks. Then Robert Henderson called me. He was new to me then. Arthur's attorney of many years, referred by Arthur with characteristic understatement. He's competent, and he doesn't talk too much. You'll like him. Robert sat across from me at his conference table and opened the file and started reading. 3 commercial properties. A supermarket building on the east side of the city, anchored by a regional grocery chain that had occupied it for 11 years. A 4-story office tower on Commercial Row, tenanted by a mid-sized law firm on 2 floors and 2 healthcare organizations on the upper levels. A strip mall on the county line with 7 retail units, a dry cleaner, a pharmacy, a nail salon, a tax preparation office, a small insurance agency, and 2 units that rotated through different businesses over the years. Combined assessed value, $2.83 million. Robert read the figure and looked up at me over his reading glasses. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I sat there in a folding chair in my good coat, the navy one I wore to funerals and important appointments, and felt something inside my chest rearrange itself very slowly. There are conditions in the trust, Robert said carefully. Your uncle was specific. Arthur's conditions were these. The properties could not be sold for a minimum of 10 years. The rental income was mine to use as I saw fit, but the trust documentation required annual accounting, administered by Robert's firm. Arthur had believed, apparently, that sudden large sums tended to change people in ways that eventually harmed them, and that watching money accumulate across time taught patience better than any other method. He wasn't wrong. He was never wrong about the things that mattered. How long have the rents been deposited? I asked. Robert checked the paperwork. The trust was established 10 years before Arthur's death. He changed the beneficiary to you 8 years ago. He cleared his throat quietly. So including the period after his death, the account has approximately, he told me the figure. I sat with it for a full minute. Then I said, Robert, I'd like you to continue managing this. Of course. I don't want anyone to know. He looked at me evenly. That's your right entirely. Not my son, not my church, not my neighbors, no one. A brief pause. Robert has always been economical with his reactions. May I ask why? I thought about it. Thought about David at 25, already developing the particular ease of someone who expected things to work out because they always had. Thought about the people in my life who treated me differently based on what they believed I could offer them. Thought about what it would mean to know, with certainty rather than suspicion, who actually loved me. Because I want to find out who people are, I said, when they think I have nothing. Robert nodded once and wrote something in his file. Then we'll proceed quietly, he said. That was 15 years ago. In that time, the rental income had supported a kidney surgery for a 63-year-old woman in my congregation whose insurance company denied her claim twice and whose family was selling furniture to cover co-pays. Full tuition for 3 children in my immediate neighborhood who had been accepted to universities they couldn't afford and were preparing to decline. 6 consecutive mortgage payments executed through a third-party nonprofit to preserve anonymity for a couple on the 3rd floor of my old apartment building who were 6 days from foreclosure in the same month they buried their 20-year-old daughter after a car accident. A domestic violence shelter that had been operating out of a church basement and needed a proper building. I purchased the lease on a suitable property and donated it, again anonymously, through a structure Robert built specifically so that no paper trail connected it to my name. I kept wearing the brown dress. I kept cleaning floors. I kept doing alterations until my hands gave me trouble, and then I slowed down but didn't stop. Not because I had to, because I needed to see, and I needed to wait. David had always known about the $85,000. I'd been transparent about the house fund for years. He'd sat at my table when I talked about Patricia Osei and the blue house on Clement Street, the one with the bay window and the overgrown lavender. He knew exactly what those dollars represented. 40 years of early mornings and aching knees and frozen parking lots. He knew, and he looked directly at that knowledge, and he reached past it. He took it anyway, stood in my living room and told me about cream leather seats with the satisfaction of a man who had made a decision he was proud of. Not once in 15 years. Not at Christmas, not at birthday lunches, not in any of the phone calls where I asked him how things were going and listened to him tell me fine, everything's fine. Had he asked me how I was doing financially? Not once had he wondered why his mother, who he thought was surviving on a cleaning salary and Social Security, always seemed to manage. Not once had he thought to look closer. He assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, an old woman in a brown dress who cleaned other people's floors. That assumption was the most expensive mistake of his life. Monday morning, 8:15 a.m. Overcast sky, cold, the kind of autumn day where the light looks like it's apologizing apologizing for itself. Noah was at my side. He'd asked to come. I'd said yes without hesitating. He had earned that right the moment he sat at my kitchen table with shaking hands and told me the truth. We arrived at the apartment building on Weston Place and found Brittany outside before we even reached the entrance. She was standing beside the pearl white SUV in a champagne-colored silk blouse that I recognized from a boutique on Halsted that charges $400 for a top. Fresh manicure, glossy phone in hand, angling herself for what appeared to be an Instagram photo. The morning light caught the SUV's hood just right. She'd clearly positioned herself carefully. She saw me and smiled. The poisoned kind. The smile that means you can't touch anything here. Eleanor, she used my first name the way people do when they want to remind you that they don't respect you. Come to see the car? It's beautiful, isn't it? It wasn't a question. I walked toward her at an even pace. Noah kept step with me. Brittany, I said, I want to ask you something first. Not about the car. About you. She tilted her head slightly, still smiling. How is Stephen? The smile flickered. Not gone. Just interrupted. A brief, involuntary processing moment. I don't know anyone named Stephen. Stephen Graves, I said. Albuquerque. He said the same thing about you. That he didn't know you. Not really. Not until it was over. His mother lost $50,000. The smile came back. Harder this time. I don't know what you're talking about. And you should know, this vehicle is in my name. Legally. So, whatever you think you're here to do. Brittany, I stepped forward. I own 3 commercial properties. Combined, they're worth nearly $3 million. I have a certified forensic accountant, a licensed private investigator, and a lawyer who filed a civil fraud claim against you and David on Friday. I have a court-authorized seizure order, and I turned, just slightly, and looked toward the end of the block. A police cruiser had turned onto the street. It moved slowly. No lights, just presence. Brittany's expression did something I can only describe as a controlled collapse. Everything she'd arranged carefully over months, all that performance, all that architecture of confidence, it just started coming apart, layer by layer, while she stood there in her champagne blouse holding her glossy phone. You stole $85,000 from a woman who cleans floors, I said, not loudly. I didn't need volume. And you did it to someone who has spent 15 years quietly paying for strangers' surgeries and tuitions and mortgage payments while wearing the same dress to church every Sunday. So when the officer gets here and you're asked to explain yourself, when they pull the complete file, and they will, all of it, Stephen's case and the credit cards and the unauthorized transfer and the exit plan you had for a marriage you'd already decided to abandon, what exactly are you going to say? She stared at me, jaw tight, something behind her eyes recalibrating furiously. The cruiser stopped. Officer Carmen Delgado, 8 years on the force on the Financial Crimes Unit Standard Procedural Team, stepped out and walked toward us at a pace that suggested she had done this many times and had every confidence in how it would end. Ma'am, she said to Brittany, I need you to surrender the keys to this vehicle per the attached court order. She held up the document, clean print, Robert's signature at the bottom, countersigned by the judge. Brittany looked at the document, looked at me, looked at Noah, who was standing quietly with his phone, not recording, just present, just witnessing. You can't, she started. Ma'am, Officer Delgado said with the particular patience of someone who has heard every possible version of you can't. The keys. David had appeared in the building's entrance. I saw him register the cruiser, the officer, the document. I saw his face do the thing faces do when a story a person has been telling themselves. I did this for us. It was practical. She's old anyway. She wasn't going to buy a house. Meets the actual version of events in public with witnesses and a seizure order. He went pale. Then he looked at me, and I watched him try to find something to say. He didn't find it. Noah spoke instead. He raised his phone. Not a recording. A series of screenshots he'd assembled carefully over the past 4 days. The bank statements, the eviction notice, the credit card history, Brittany's contact with the man Diane had identified in her investigation. Dad, he said. His voice was steady in a way that made my throat tighten. Should I tell them who Grandma really is? The silence that followed was brief and total. Brittany looked at Noah, then at me. Her phone buzzed in her hand, twice, rapidly, the way a phone buzzes when someone's been trying to reach you. She glanced at the screen. Something shifted in her face. Not fear exactly, calculation. She threw the keys, not handed them, threw them at the pavement between us. The sound was small and hard. Then she turned, walked to the curb, and climbed into a black Audi that had materialized there, idling, waiting, a man I'd never seen at the wheel. It pulled away fast, made a sharp left at the corner, and was gone. Officer Delgado retrieved the keys from the pavement without comment and began processing the seizure documentation. David stood in the entrance. He was still pale. Noah walked to his father, stopped a few feet away, and just looked at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked at my son too. I remembered him at 3 years old, crying because his father left. Remembered carrying him. Remembered choosing over and over to stay and fight for something better. David, I said. He finally looked at me. Robert will be in touch. You'll need to get your own attorney. I paused. I paid your debt, all of it. $147,000. You didn't ask me to. You didn't know I could. But you're going to spend the next however many years figuring out why that matters. Why the way you did this matters. And I genuinely hope you do. He opened his mouth, closed it. I walked back toward the street street with Noah at my side. "Grandma E," he said after half a block. His voice had lost its steadiness now. He was 17, and what had just happened was enormous, and he was starting to feel it. "Where does she go? Brittany, where does she go now?" I thought about Diane's file, about Stephen Graves in Albuquerque, about the pattern that was identical, and always found a new beginning somewhere. "Somewhere she thinks no one knows her," I said. "Will they catch her?" Robert forwarded everything to the Albuquerque DA's office this morning. Stephen's attorneys have been notified. The fraud documentation is thorough. I reached over and took his hand. He let me. "She has fewer places to go than she thinks." We walked to the end of the block. Patricia Osei had texted me over the weekend. The blue house on Clement Street was still available. The offer deadline had been extended. The lavender in the yard, she said, had started blooming unseasonably, a small rebellion against the autumn cold. I wrote back, "I'm ready to make the offer. It has been 4 months. The house on Clement Street is mine. The deed has my name on it, Eleanor May Hutchins, and I have looked at it more times than I can count, the same way you press a bruise, half to confirm it's real." I planted lavender in the yard. The existing plants needed significant pruning, but they were alive, just overgrown and ignored, which I understood. The commercial properties continue. I've been working with Robert to establish a formal charitable foundation, the Arthur Hutchins Community Foundation, named as it should have been named long ago, to continue the anonymous support work with structure and oversight, because Noah suggested it, and he was right. Noah came over last weekend to help me hang pictures. That's something I've never been able to do. Not permanently, not without a landlord's permission, not in a place that was truly mine. We put up 6 frames in an afternoon, and when we were done, he stood back and looked at the wall and said quietly, "This looks like you, Grandma E." I didn't answer. I just stood there looking at it. It did. David is in therapy. Robert tells me this in an update call, not as gossip, but as relevant context. It affects the civil proceedings. His attorney has indicated he intends to cooperate fully and make restitution beyond the sum I've already cleared. Whether that extends to something harder and more personal, whether my son will find his way back to being someone I recognize, I don't know. I'm holding that question loosely. Brittany Calloway Hutchins filed for divorce from a location her attorney would not disclose. The Albuquerque DA's office opened a case. The fraud documentation from both incidents is now in the hands of 3 separate jurisdictions. Diane Fortis, speaking with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of someone watching a long thread finally pull tight, told me she's running out of new starts. She said it the way people say things they know to be true. "I wore the brown dress to church last Sunday. Old habit. Comfort, maybe. The women who've sat near me for 30 years saw the same Eleanor they always see. Quiet, reliable, unassuming. After the service, a woman I barely know stopped me in the vestibule. She'd heard something. This city is small in the ways that matter, and she looked at me with an expression I've gotten a few times since the story got around. "Eleanor," she said. "I had no idea." I smiled. "Most people didn't," I said. "That was rather the point." I walked out into the November morning. My house 3 blocks away. My name on the deed. The lavender waiting. And I thought about what it had cost to remain invisible for so long. The patience of it. The discipline. And then I thought about Brittany's face when the officer said the keys. I thought about what she had been so certain of, right up until she wasn't. She had looked at an old woman in a brown dress and seen nothing worth worrying about. That particular mistake never gets cheaper, no matter how many times people make it.